Hello everyone, welcome to our review of cost behavior, or how organizations try to identify the behavior of costs. And the underlying point of this is that we are trying, like we said when we talked about managerial accounting, we are trying to identify how things act, costs happen, so that we can predict the future. So we're trying to predict how a cost will behave based on what we do next month and so forth. That tends to be the same as it has behaved in the past. So if our costs have gone up when we have increased our production, then if we increase our production in the future, then we would expect our cost to go up again or more or by a certain amount. And that's what we're trying to narrow down, is not just that it'll go up, but by how much, so that we have an anticipation of how profitable we're going to be in the future. So that's what's behind it. We don't just try to learn about cost behavior because we're curious, but so that we can make a plan and that we can be prepared for those costs. And if we know how they behave, we also have a better idea of how to manage them and make sure that they're as efficient as possible, and that we're not spending more than we need to. Not that we're trying to cut costs altogether, but that we spend it on in the best way to achieve the most output and the greatest efficiency. So we are going to now that we've got costs classified by inventory, those that are inventoriable or product, or those types of costs, and those that are period, we're going to kind of focus more on the product costs, the manufacturing costs, and try to then look at them as how they behave, fixed versus variable. And those are our two buckets, if you will. And I want you to remember that this refers only to the response of a cost to changes in volume. Okay, not other changes, not over time. Costs could change over time. That does not necessarily tell us whether or not a cost is fixed or variable. The definition is that it changes. If it's variable, it changes in the same direction as the changes in volume. So if we make more of our product, or sell more of our product, or just do more activity, this cost will go up. It will go up in the same direction as a change in volume. If we reduce volume, meaning we stop doing a certain activity or we do it less, then that cost will be lower, or how much we spend total on that item will be lower. That's the idea of a variable cost. Fixed costs do not change with volume. They may change for other reasons, but they don't change because we make more of our product. So a classic example of a fixed cost is rent on a building. You don't pay more rent for a building based on how much you produce in the building. You negotiate a rate. You have a contract, a lease contract, and that's how much you pay. Whether you make 5,000 widgets or 10,000 widgets, it does not change. It may change at the end of the year because of the contract and go up to, instead of $1,000 a month, it's now $1,100 a month. That's a change, but that doesn't make it variable. It's still fixed because it doesn't change because of the volume of our product that we make. Okay? So that's the key, and that's why we have to think about is what is it that makes this cost change? Is it actually a change in the volume or not? Okay? Now, a little twist on how to think about this. If your cost is fixed, like rent, like $1,000 a month, and you make 500 units of your product that month, that's $2 per unit. If instead you make $1,000 of your product that month, that's only $1 of rent per unit. Because the amount of rent itself doesn't change. The total amount of rent doesn't change. And so as you change volume, then the cost per unit or cost per whatever the volume is measured in, units or gallons or any whatever level of activity, it's going to change as well, the per unit cost. On the other hand, we generally can think that variable costs are not going to change per unit. So if we need two wheels per bicycle to assemble bicycles, and we determine that wheels are a variable cost because they go up with volume. As we make more bicycles, we're going to need more wheels, and there's going to be a higher cost. Not per wheel, that will stay the same, most likely. And we'll still need 2 wheels on every bicycle. That's not going to change. But how many in total wheels we need is going to change depending on whether we're making 500 bicycles or 600 bicycles. See how it changes based on volume compared to the rent example. Okay, so there is an example of fixed and variable. Another way to picture this difference is on a graph. Okay, and drawing lines, and we kind of assume that these are going to be straight lines for now. Okay, and so if a cost is truly variable, then when you make 0 units down there in the left-hand corner, right here, when you make 0 units, that's how many units produced on this axis, the x-axis, then you would have 0 cost because you would buy, if you make 0 bicycles, you need 0 wheels. So your cost would be 0, and it would go up by the cost of 2 wheels for every bicycle you made. As units produced go up, so would the cost go up. And it would be this very straight diagonal line to represent how that cost would change over time. And so if you wanted to know how much of this you needed to spend on this variable cost, and you knew that you were going to make 4,000 units, or your plan was to make 4,000 units, you could go up to here on this graph and find how much cost it is, how much it would cost to make 4,000 units. All right. So fixed costs, on the other hand, even if you make 0 bicycles, your rent on the building is the same. And if you make 4,000 units, your rent on the building is the same. It is a straight horizontal line. The same no matter what the volume is, up to a point. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay? Now, as we combine these two ideas, there are some costs that are mixed, meaning they're partially fixed and partially variable. Meaning they have a cost that you're going to have to pay each month or year or whatever time period, regardless of what your volume is. And then on top of that monthly cost, then you're going to pay more based on if your volume. All right? So that's what we refer to as a mixed cost. So when you have 0 volume of whatever it is you're doing, then you still have the fixed cost to pay. But then from there, every unit you make is going to cost you more. So you're back to the variable diagonal, but your corner piece, instead of being at 0, is going to be at the fixed cost. So, as some of you may have learned in algebra, the formula for this line is y equals mx plus b. In your textbook, they mention it in a little different order. But what we need to make sure we do, because I don't really care what order we do this in, as long as we know that y, or the total costs, equals the fixed costs, which is the y-intercept, total fixed costs, wherever this line is going to cross this line, across the y-axis, is our fixed costs. And then we add the variable cost per unit, that's the slope, or how much the variable costs are going to go up per each unit of volume, and then we multiply that by units of volume. So this formula is got two purposes. It is used to describe a mixed cost that may have components that are fixed and variable, a single cost, or it could be used to describe the costs in general for a firm, because any business is going to have both fixed and variable costs. So you can use it either way, or companies use it both ways. What we want to be able to make sure we can do is split, if we know some costs, to try to use some math tools in order to split the amount that is fixed and the amount that is variable, if it is not readily apparent. And so we're going to come back to how that would do mathematically in a little later, actually in our second review podcast. Okay? So for now, we're going to look at some things that we need to remember as we consider this definition of fixed and variable. Okay? One of the things to remember about fixed costs, some of them are what we refer to as discretionary. So once you've got things decided as what they are, fixed or variable, looking at the fixed cost, a discretionary fixed cost is one that, yes, we expect to be fixed, not going to change with volume, but we have some choice every month on whether or not to pay it, or we could change the total amount every month, each month, based on our needs, even though it's not based on our volume. And then some costs are committed, meaning we've signed a long-term 5-year, say, lease on a building. That's committed. You can't get out of that commitment without paying significant penalty. That would be a committed fixed cost. And obviously there's a little difference in terms of how we look at those that are discretionary, that we could adjust if necessary, and those that are committed. All right? Now, when we are looking at these costs and defining whether they're fixed or variable, we want to make sure that we understand what time period we're looking at. Okay? Are we talking about the next 3 months, or are we talking about the next 3 years? Okay, costs become much more variable if we have a long enough term. So even if we have a rent agreement on a yearly basis, over 5 years, that could be adjusted based on the volume we need. So that typically fixed costs could become variable based on the time period. Most of the time, we're looking at 1 year or less when we're considering these definitions. For that very reason, long term, we could basically decide almost every cost is variable. And then the other concept that you need to keep in the back of your mind that we'll wrap up this podcast with is the concept of relevant range. When a company is operating in its normal production, it generally makes a pretty standard amount of its product. And therefore, we can kind of predict what costs are going to do based on it not being too far out of the norm. As soon as you are outside the relevant range, outside normal production, okay, then costs become very skewed, meaning they become very hard to predict. We don't know what's going to happen. Imagine a factory that's built to make 500 automobiles a week or something crazy like that. What would happen if you decided to only make 2? That would be considered so far out of the norm that all of our costs, considerations, all of our predictions would probably not be correct. People would be so inefficient, the machines would be so inefficient, there'd be so much downtime that the cost would be all over the place. The same thing happens if it's built for 500 and you're trying to make it make 700. Now everything is so inefficient because they're crowded and people are running into each other, machines are breaking down and there's no time to fix them, and all kinds of that sort of thing could be happening. That would be outside the relevant range on the other end, and therefore would skew costs. So things that we would expect to happen would be very difficult to assume. And so we need to make sure that when we're looking at costs, when we're looking at estimates, when we're considering using this information to predict the future, that anything that is significantly outside the relevant range is dangerous to use these estimates on and pretend that they're going to be accurate. All right, we'll need to rethink if that's really what we think is going to happen, that kind of extra production or that lower production, then we need to look at a different kind of model. We probably need to reconsider all of our, even what's fixed and what's variable again, because it's outside the normal production.